All right. Good morning, everyone. First of all, let me just thank you. I know some of you are on Central Time and maybe even Mountain Time and Pacific Time. So let me just thank you for getting up early this morning and sharing your morning with me. I really appreciate it. I know how hard it can be. I have a young child, and I realize that sometimes in the morning, especially on a Friday, it's really hard to just to be focused and present. And so I just want to thank you for just joining me this morning. I would also like to encourage you all. As far as my teaching style, I'm very relational. So I will stop. I will ask you questions. If you are not comfortable, speaking, but you have things that you can add or questions that you might have, please put them in the chat. Dallas is helping me this morning. And so Dallas, if you don't mind monitoring the chat, and just feeling free to jump in and stop me if there are questions or ideas or even resources that you all use that maybe I haven't mentioned or others may benefit from knowing. So just all of that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started then with the presentation. Let me first introduce myself. I am actually full-time faculty here at the Chicago School. And I currently also have a private practice in Indianapolis, Indiana. And excuse me. And for the majority of my clients, I work with African American men and women. I do couples counseling, and I see very few adolescents. Usually it has to be something that really kind of fits my areas of expertise for me to see someone that's a teenager. And I try not to see anyone under the age of 13 because that is just not my area or my specialty. So one thing I'm going to just talk to you about is kind of the idea of how do we engage African American men in treatment. My title, I don't believe in counseling. I tell you, I hear that or some form of it at least once a week when I'm working with a new African American male. And so most of the men that come into my office, and it's not couples counseling, have either come in because the women in their life have referred them, threatened them, or have talked to them about kind of how it's benefited them and can see how it benefit their partner. And so that's how I get most of my referrals. I don't get, as long as I've been doing this, and I've been doing this for quite a while, I don't ever know of one of my African American men clients who have referred other men to me. And I don't think that's personal. I just think that there's a lack of talking about mental health within the community. And because of that, there's usually not many that say, hey, I'm seeking counseling. Here's a good counselor. I will have men who have come in and been referred by other women, and not necessarily, though, even if it wasn't the woman that was seen by them, but their husbands were, they'll refer them then. So that's really fascinating to me. I don't know how to change that. It's something that I'm trying to figure out because I do think that if men were to talk about their own struggles and challenges in this way, then we would see more men coming into counseling. So I'm going to share with you a quote. 1 second. Oh, shoot. Sorry. Okay. Oh, here we go. Okay, I love this quote by Sean Flinging, and he is the founder of the Good Men Project. I don't know if you guys are familiar with his work, but it says, I am no less a man because I fear. I am no less a man because of mental health struggles. I am no less a man because only I get to decide what it means for me to be a man. And so I really like that because I think it talks and speaks to the individual and their own struggles, and that they are not just a number, that we recognize, that their life story may be different than the person standing next to them. And so I really appreciate this quote from him. And I appreciate you guys could Google the Good Men Project. There's a ton of information that you can share with clients, that you can, give clients as a resource, because he really talks about men's health and men's mental health. And so there's information about relationships, there's information about finances, there's information, of course, about mental health. And it looks at men from the perspective of, we are very diverse, that men are very diverse and our relationships are diverse. Who we love is diverse, and it really respects all men. And so it's a website that I tend to refer people to because of the blogs and the information. And that one I think has a podcast as well that some of my clients have enjoyed. One thing that I'll do throughout the presentation, I'll talk to you about resources I use, and I have a list of resources on the last slide. The information in this presentation will be available to you. It'll be posted on the registration site, so you can go in and download the PowerPoint, as well as the video will be on our YouTube channel. It'll take us a couple of weeks to go through all of the videos from all of the presentations, but they will be available to you. And so once we have that complete, if you've registered for the conference, then you'll receive an email letting you know how to access our YouTube videos. Okay. So I want to talk to you first about my defining moment, like why this was something for me that I decided was really an area where I wanted to grow in knowledge, where I wanted to help others to grow in knowledge. And I also, I just wanted to kind of build my practice where African-American males, Black men would be comfortable coming in and talking to me. And so one of the cases for me was to Colin. Of course, that's not his real name, but he was a client that I had many, many years ago. And he wasn't my first African-American male client. Before I started working in private practice and doing other things, I was a SAMI therapist, so I did dual diagnosis. And so I recognized that most of my focus in that environment was more on substance abuse issues and their impact on mental health and self-care and keeping them well, that I didn't really kind of focus on more of the mental health issues. And so for me, he came in my office, and the very first time he came in, I was doing an intake session, and, after I got done asking him like questions about who he was and just, a little bit about him, I asked him why he came in, and he just started to cry. And I tell you, he sobbed for a good 5 minutes or so. And then he stood up and he said to me, "I can't do this." And he left the office. I tried to talk to him about coming back in. He walked out the door, and I thought I'd never see that man again. But then I got a call from his wife, which said, "I want him to come back. Would you see him if he came back?" And I told her that I would not turn anyone away. And so he made an appointment and he came back in, and it was probably about a month and a half later. And so I decided I was going to take a different approach with him. I was going to really try to build a relationship first, one where he felt comfortable with trusting me with who he was and not necessarily diving right into the problem, which is what I was doing before. So I just asked him about like where he was from, some of the things in his life that he was really proud about. And so he told me that his mom had him when she was 12, and that he was pretty much raised without a father. His grandmother was the one that raised him. And what he was most proud about is what he had accomplished with his family. He had 4 really good kids. They were professionals. He loved his wife tremendously, and her happiness was very important to him. And he told me about their history. He met her when he was about 18 and she was 16, and he was a drug dealer. He didn't tell her that, but at that time he was living on his own. His mom had left him to go live in another state, and she had left him the house, but the house had a mortgage, and he was trying to survive. And so what he did was he sold drugs so that could happen. So anyway, to make a long story short, we didn't really talk about the depression until the very next session. We just really spent time like getting to know him, how he felt about Mental health, why he cried, like he apologized and apologized for crying. And so, just making him feel comfortable with the fact that he didn't need to, that his pain and expressing his pain was okay. And so then in the next session, we started talking about his depression, how he's been depressed, he thinks, since he was a teenager, and that he's never addressed it. And all he's ever done is hide it from his family. And so we talked about what hiding looked like. We talked about if he could feel free to be able to express his depression. And so this was over some time. It really did take us a while to even get to the point where he was willing to address some of his depression. I never, in the time he worked with me, got him to the point that he would seek out medical treatment. He didn't trust it. He didn't believe in it. He didn't want to be diagnosed in that way. And he didn't want to take medication. So, of course, I explained to him there was only so much I could do. But at the same time, I couldn't just say, if you're not going to do this, then we're not going to work on it, because there were things that really did impact him. So I bring this case up because for me, he was very different. He was very different than how I had experienced men in counseling before, and even men in my own life. My dad was very much that macho male. I only seen him cry once, and I was an adult. My mom had gotten sick, and we weren't sure she was going to survive. And he cried when the doctors were talking to us, and I was in shock. I just looked at him. I didn't know what to say or what to do, because that was never anything I'd seen him do in the past. And so for me, when he first cried in my office, I was so uncomfortable. Jakal, when he first cried, I didn't know what to do. I was uncomfortable. He could probably sense that I was uncomfortable, and maybe even that contributed to him walking out the office. And so it's when I realized that I need to be more educated on what are the needs of African American men in counseling. Like, how can I help them? And how do I connect them? And how am I more knowledgeable so that they're able to express themselves and feel like, that this is worth it. Dallas, is it okay if you go in and you, under participants, if you would turn off the doorbell? I would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, thanks. All right, so here's some numbers, just a little snapshot of Black men in in mental health. And so 20% more than their white counterparts see themselves as having serious psychological distress. Men ages 18 to 14 report more feelings of anxiety and depression than white men, but they are less likely to seek treatment. Suicide is the third leading cause of death among adolescents and young adults among African American men. But again, they're less likely to seek services. So there's been a lot of research on when there are thoughts and feelings of suicide, what are some of the coping things they do, and most of them do not seek some type of professional help. So, and this information comes from therapyforblackmen.org, and you can find these same statistics through NAMI if you search their website as well. But we'll talk about therapy for Black men later, because I think it's something that as professionals we can use to reach out to this group. Okay, so part of what I kind of want to talk to you about is that we cannot neglect to see Black men from the racial trauma that they've experienced. And so several things that kind of, like, when I think about Jakal, that really stuck out for me was the fact that he had grew up in poverty, that he had a mother who was a teenager when she was pregnant. I mean, well, she was very young when she got pregnant, but she had him at, I think, well, it was 12 or 13. And then from a generational perspective, his grandmother wasn't married. He had no example of males or manhood in his life. And so that for him was a challenge, because all he learned about being a man, he learned from the women in his life. And so most of what he was taught was to be strong, don't cry. You're the pillar of the family. You need to make sure that that, you know, you're thinking about your wife and your children first. And some of those messages coming from a place of wanting him to be a good dad and a good husband are great. But what they also sent him is that he was not allowed to feel, and that he had to hide his feelings because he was okay as long as they were okay, which wasn't always the truth. Understanding that transgenerational trauma, the impact it has on the person, their psyche, their genetics, how they view the world, that, you know, that what happened, you know, a generation ago or two generations ago still impacts the person. And then any personal racial trauma that he's experienced. He was a professional. He was in a industry where there were not many Black professionals, men or women. And so for him, you know, going to work each day was a challenge. He made really good money. He knew it was necessary to get his family where he wanted them to be, but it was a challenge for him, and he didn't have anyone to talk about it with other than his wife. He had a few good friends. He was a member of a church, and he was active in the church. But sometimes, and this has been my experience, I don't have any research that backs it up, but sometimes complaining about racism within the community, and you guys have a different perspective, please share, can feel like you're weak because everyone deals with it. Everyone experiences it. So it's really hard sometimes to really just kind of sit and talk about how it wears on you with people in your life, because you know that they have the same stories. So if anyone has a different perspective, please share it. I would love for you to do that. Like I said, this is coming from my own experiences in working with the community. Okay. So another thing that we have to understand when we're looking at treating and working with our African-American males is just barriers to care. And so similar to what Jakal was experiencing, which was, you know, like I said, I was uncomfortable that first session, and I'm sure for him, he picked up on that. So he didn't feel like it was a safe place. Many of our in our community, they don't have health care, or their health care insurance is not at a place where they would be able to afford certain counselors or good therapy. They don't necessarily have those resources. And even in the community, there may not be the resources to have counseling available. I know in the area where I live, there was one counseling center that dealt with Medicare and Medicaid. So they took those clients that may not have other forms of health insurance. And the experience for them was very difficult, those that use the services. And then they have been in the community for about 30 years. And then the center closed. And so now for people within the urban community, for them to be able to have those resources, they would have to travel. By bus, it would take them an hour. By car, we're looking at maybe 35 minutes or so. And they're in lower socioeconomic white communities. So the likelihood that they're going to find a therapist that feels as if they understand them is highly unlikely. And I'm not saying that they don't. I'm just saying that it's really just harder for them to even seek out help. And so that really resonates with me, that the inability to have those resources or to get to those resources are extreme in my community. I'd love to hear about yours. Like, do you find that it's a challenge for Black men to easily access some of these resources where you are? Okay, and please feel free to use the chat.
Hi, this is Jessica. I live in the south suburbs, and I completely agree with this. I myself am a bilingual therapist, and even those challenges of finding a therapist that can speak the language and understand the culture. I worked with a lot of lower income communities, and the challenge is, you know, there are many community events to kind of promote what is available for resources, but what we find is, you know, many of the men are not attending those community resources to even be aware of what's available. It's often, you know, mothers and their children and so forth. And I'm sure that if they're not disclosing their challenges to their partner or someone in their family, then that information is not getting passed along as well. And so obviously there's, as you're saying, kind of a quietness or kind of keeping to themselves. And so they're not gaining access to what's already somewhat limited resources to begin with as well. And then the challenges of even getting into services, especially when there's such a long wait list to even get in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think that's uncommon. When I think about other communities, I don't necessarily see the situation that my community in is uncommon for many in many cities. And I think that in my area, and I live in Ohio, but I live close to the border in Ohio and Indiana. And so my community is one where I think it's a challenge nationally. And then we're not even talking about states where the number of African American or underrepresented clients are really high. So states like Nebraska and Wyoming, where there's those pocket of people, but there's no services that really address their needs. So Dallas, I see there's a couple of things in the chat, but I'm not sure if I can't see the chat. I don't know if there's any questions or anything that.
Yes. Some people are just sharing their experiences. Nicole, so she said, "Good morning. My voice has gone completely, but yes, the resources are scarce here in rural Louisiana, along with the stigma attached to mental health." And Sharon Anderson said, "I'm in Jamaica, and yes, they are less likely to come into the counseling therapist. Men will bring themselves when their marriage is on the line. Most times they'll seek the church."
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's been my experience too. That most of the men, and I think I said this earlier, that come in for individuals because their wives have gotten to the point where they're threatening them, where they're feeling as if their wives and partners are feeling as if you don't change, if you don't address this, I can't live like this anymore. And so that'll bring them in. And that's where many of them start with, I don't believe in counseling. In my experience is that they're telling me that they're there because someone is asking them to be there, but not because they necessarily feel it's going to be helpful. So, Jessica, please, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that. One thing that I find that has been helpful, and I'll talk about this a little bit when I get to resources, is that even though those resources may not be available within the communities themselves, there are a ton of great resources online. And so I share this with my clients. Like I share some of the resources I find, things that speak to them specifically. The Omega Sci-Fi fraternity has a mental health program that they support and have developed called Brother, You're on My Mind. They have great resources, fact sheets. If the fraternity has a chapter in your area, they will come out and talk about mental health issues. It's phenomenal. And so sometimes what we have to do is kind of look outside of maybe the professionals because we don't have that, or there's not access to that in the area, but there's other resources and organizations that recognize the need as well. And so have created ways for to kind of get some of this information out. And again, I'll talk about this a little bit later. But another thing, there's several organizations that'll offer, if as counselors and therapists, we are willing to serve, and we register with the organization and they vet to make sure that we are culturally sound in treatment. They'll refer some clients to you that are either Black clients, men in particular, and they'll pay for the first five sessions or 8 sessions. There's an organization that'll pay for 8 sessions. And so what they do is they're trying to create a network of people who can serve the community, because they recognize that the disparity in availability of resources within some urban communities or within African American communities overall. So I think our biggest barrier is stigma. And I don't know how you all feel about that. And again, that's my personal thought and my years of experience. Because I find if I can get men in within 1 or 2 sessions, they feel better. They feel heard. They feel understood. They begin to let go of some of the shame that they associate with, with mental health and mental health needs. And so it's about trying to get them in the door. That's really a challenge. And so as I have here with NAMI, they reported 63% of Blacks believe mental health conditions is a sign of personal weakness. And so that's been my experience too, that, I will have a male come in and say, I look so weak, or, I hate if they shed a tear, really trying to hide their tears or hold it in. I've had so many men that'll just get up and walk out of a session because they don't want to cry in front of me. And so, and when I say walk out, they'll just walk into the hallway or walk into an area where they can just kind of compose themselves and come back. And I don't try to stop them. I let them do that, but I always make sure I tell them that it's okay to be emotional. What they've experienced in their life, it is emotional, and it's okay for them to do that. There's no judgment here. And so just really trying to create an environment where tears are welcomed. I also don't stop anger. I know some counselors can be they can be challenged, especially if Black men get angry in their office. And so I had a client recently who he was mad about something that had happened. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he started yelling and he pounded on the table next to him. And I guess he expected that I would respond with, "You can't do that," or, calm down or something like that. And I didn't. I just let him be expressive. And so I didn't feel threatened. He wasn't, I didn't feel like I was going to be attacked. I realized that he had all this pent up emotion and he was letting it go. And I work in an environment where usually there's not very many people in the office. So it was okay. I didn't feel like I had to worry about him scaring other people or anything like that. And so after he was done, he said to me, he said, "You are the first counselor that's ever let me get angry and not try to stop me." And I said to him, "That makes me sad. I hate to hear that for you, because if I'm angry, I'd want to express it too." And so just like allowing him that, he's only maybe done it maybe a couple of times since then, but it's really like that pent up emotion and needing to get it out and allowing him the space to do that. Now, I know everyone doesn't work in an environment where they can do that, or that's available to them, and that's okay. But I would suggest that you ensure your clients that, part of it is that you have to think about, the other people, their trauma, the counselors, something that lets them know it's not them, and helping them to find ways that they can express it and they can get it out, whatever that might look like for them. So, Dallas, was there anything else in the chat that I should attend to?
More people are just sharing their experience and agreeing with you that it was really sad to hear about that client that you had when he was expressing his anger.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you guys I appreciate you participating in the chat. It's always nice to kind of know that, that you have had similar experiences. You were challenged in similar ways. It helps us to kind of create a community where we're getting to do what we want our Black clients to do and our Black men to do, is to talk about it, figure out ways where we can fix it or change it, or just to increase our awareness of it. So, and then I think someone in the chat had mentioned faith community, that many in the African-American community, they'll first turn to their faith, to their churches or temples or whatever, whatever they believe first, and not necessarily view what they're experiencing as a medical condition or a mental health issue. And so I think from my experience lately, because I've had a lot of referrals from pastors, I get, the place where I work, we've developed a scholarship with a local church where they'll pay for 25% of the cost above whatever the insurance will pay if they have insurance, and they'll pay 50% if they don't have insurance. And so I think that, building those relationships with the faith community will allow them, if their pastor or, priest or someone is saying, hey, here's a place where you can go, they're more likely, now they don't always come in, but they're more likely to use those resources because they feel like it's approved by the people that they look up to. And so that might be something for you all to consider in your private practices, is maybe being able to build those connections with those in the community, the faith-based community, and helping to find ways that you can serve. Okay. All right. And bias and inequity in care. And so I could go on and on and on about my experiences in this area, working with medical professionals and the challenges of finding good professionals. Like in the Indianapolis area, there's a really good African-American psychiatrist who was trained at Harvard. He went to Harvard Medical School. And so he's the first person I refer people to because he has an understanding. They're more comfortable because it's really hard, to find Black psychiatrists. And so it's gotten to the point now that he has a waiting list. And so now it's hard. I have to find other resources to be able to refer clients to so they can get in earlier. But finding ways that you can connect with people that have shown that they have less bias, more equity in care is important. And I want to bring up a article. I'm so sorry I didn't put the reference in here, but when I put the slides up on the website, I'll make sure I include the reference. But there's an article that from 2018 on how African-American males are more likely to be diagnosed with major mental health disorders, particularly schizophrenia, than any other group. It's African-American males, then Hispanic, Latino males, and then white males. And so a lot of that has to come from just how, there's personal bias in diagnosing, and how even some of the structures. And that research project they did, they actually gave physicians and psychiatrists the background of a person without the names or any identifying information. And so they found that when they gave those professionals that blind information, they were less likely to diagnose with severe mental illness than if they had identifying information. And that was the only thing that was changed. And so part of our roles, as I see my role as a counselor, is that that's something I need to know. When my clients come back and they tell me they had a hard time with their medical profession, their medical professional, I always make sure I take the time to kind of do a little research, not necessarily, because I know clients sometimes say it's not me, it's you situation, but I do want to know those that they really feel like, oh, that doctor really connected with me. It was a great experience. I feel like I'm better because I've been there. I make note of that, and I'm sure you all do too, so that you can refer more clients that way. I'll call the office. I'll get some additional information. I'll make sure they know who I am. I'll try to either meet with the physicians or with the medical professionals, the nurse practitioners, whoever. And just so I can make sure that, if I'm sending a client to you, you know exactly why I'm sending it to you. You know what kind of my mission is, and you're able to assist them. So really just trying to build a network is very, very important. Sorry, guys, I can get very long-winded. I apologize. I'm going to try to speed through some of these so we can have plenty of time. Okay, so here's a quiz for you just to take. I'm not going to ask you guys to share your answers at all, but I just want you to think about who you are and your work as a counselor. If you're a student and you're not yet practicing, I want you to kind of consider some of these questions and where are the areas where you need to grow. And so, so the first one is, have you treated Black clients or received training in cultural competency for Black mental health? And so this would be above your multicultural course, where, it's really kind of an overview of different cultures and making sure you're aware of your own biases, but really just kind of diving into what are specific to the cultures that you serve. And then what resources for you and the client do you have that address non-white mental health needs? So many times, in our classes, as an instructor, I will give overall like, hey, here's a great resource. And so some of those resources may work very well with my white clients, but not so much with those within a certain community. And so are you aware of those resources that are specific to the community? Do you feel like you can communicate effectively with your non-white clients? Can you relate well to them? Do you see your cultural background impacting your communication and treatment? And I ask this question not just for those that may not be of the same culture, but even, sometimes as women and men, the biases we develop about other genders, they come out in the way we work. And so, how I explained with my dad, like he was not an emotional man, he was a very strong man. And so, the message I received in seeing my client cry, like sob, like literally just like fall in tears, it was very hard for me because that was not my experience. And I cannot I have a lot of uncles. None of them have I ever seen shed a tear. So for me, it was really like, okay, I don't know what to do here. And so those biases, like, have you been hurt by the opposite gender in your life, that when you hear stories or you see that they're coming to you with certain issues, that you want to speak to that out of your own experience and not necessarily out of what they need? Right. And are you aware of the differences in healthcare outcomes for your Black clients? And again, understanding who you're referring your clients to, what are they likely to have? How can you help prepare them, in certain situations when they're going out seeking help? And are you comfortable integrating different beliefs and practices into your treatment? Okay. And again, I'm not going to ask you to share this, but I do want you to consider the questions. All right, so I talked about this a little bit in the presentation I did yesterday. So those of you that have been that attended that one, I'm sorry that you're going to get a bit of a recap, but hopefully it'll be something where you gain a little bit more information. A lot of times what we need to do is to build resiliency. And so there's several things that we can do. It's okay to explore racial wounds. Like when my uh, Black African-American clients come in and we're talking, I'll ask them about like, what's it like in their work environments. I have some professionals who've done very well for themselves. And so I'll ask them about what it's like in their work environment. How is it to be the only African-American male? I have a teacher, an African-American male teacher, who's the only Black teacher. No, he's the only Black teacher in the school, and there's only, I think, 3 other men in the school. And so we talk about that, like, what is it like to be a man in an environment where that you're working under and for and with so many women, and where are some of that ability to communicate, like what are the challenges in that, and then to be the only Black person in the building, like what is that like? What's that experience like for you? How does that impact your mental health? Like, what are you doing to make sure you're well? And so I also talk about battle fatigue, and this can also be called racial fatigue. And I think when it was first coined, it was racial battle fatigue. And so the idea of like, it's exhausting sometimes. It really is exhausting to be a man. There's so much that falls on you. There's the way that our culture defines masculinity and fitting into those roles. And if you don't fit into those roles, and what does that mean? And so really just kind of talking to them about battle fatigue, it can be really enlightening for people to understand that's why they're tired. That's why their blood pressure's up. That's why they're emotional or they're angry. It's because that's what they're experiencing. It can be empowering. So allowing them to avoid silence on the topic of, just who they are and their experiences, the racial trauma they're experiencing, making sure that you talk to them about it and present a place where they can be open about what that's like. Processing anger and fear, and diminishing shame. Like that's one thing that's really important in my early phase of working with African-American men, is to take away some of that shame of just being there, of needing counseling or needing to work through some of their issues, needing professionals to help with that. So that's part of the early phases for me, is that I really want them to feel like this is not a place where they can be ashamed of what they experienced or who they are. And then always exploring addictions. For many minorities in our country, addictions has been the aftermath of a lot of racial trauma. And so we talk about that and we explore that. What does it mean to them? Where are the areas where they may have some challenges? And if they don't, then okay, that's great. But if they do, like making sure that we talk about that. And if I don't work with addictions now, and so what I do is I have a list of people who do. And for my African American men, I make sure that they're people who are skilled in working with Black men as well. And then understanding what is personal freedom through the willingness to heal, educate, and fight injustice. So you are free to do that in any way that makes you feel better, that helps you to heal. And I don't put pressure on you to save every African American male in the community. I don't put pressure on you to feel like you have to mentor or address. If that's where your heart is, I'm going to help you with that. But for some of my men, they're just trying to survive. They're not in a place in their life where they're able to give yet. And that's okay too. There doesn't have to be shame associated with that. And then one thing that I love to do with my clients is to create a soul care plan. And so I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but so when I think of soul care, and I wish I could say this is my ideal and it's not, it came from a book where counseling African American couples. And so the soul care plan is this idea that in our community, in the African American community, the importance of the soul. So in our soul, we have soul food, we have soul music. I was saying yesterday, my grandmother used to say that doesn't sit well with my soul when she didn't want to do something or you were asking her to do something. And so the soul is something that many of our community members can connect with better than like a self-care plan. When I present the idea of a self-care plan, I get a lot of resistance. I get clients who say, I don't have time to take care of myself. I'm too busy taking care of everyone else. But when you talk to them about their soul, they're more likely to stop and think about how they could do better to care for that sense of who they are as a moral person, as a just person. And so they're more likely to try to develop a soul care plan than they would a self-care plan. And of course, those can have benefits of each other. But I think, sometimes just changing the words and helping them to see it in a different light can be very helpful. And so one way you can use it is repairing moral injuries. So working on that part of you where, again, that shame, that fear, that rage, some of that has come about. Like you can use it to repair moral injuries. I also use it to help them to be assertive in certain areas where they're not, to not be taken advantage of, to be at peace with not wanting to be the spokesperson for the culture, or just kind of like, I need a break. I'm fatigued. I need a break, and helping them to do that as well. Okay. All right. So battle fatigue, I took a little bit more time to talk about it here, but I think we've done a pretty good job of this already. So I'm going to kind of move past this slide rather quickly. And again, you'll have access to all of these if you need them. Another thing that I do, and I don't necessarily do this with all my clients, but I do try to do this with many of my Black men, is because they never thought about, generational trauma and how that generational trauma has affected them and how it'll affect their children. So they may understand, for instance, that, their dad was abusive. And so they try really hard not to be abusive. Or that their dad was an alcoholic. So now they don't drink, or they realize that they may drink too much. But what I like about this is really kind of going back and seeing how some of those things have impact generation after generation after generation. And even talking about mental health in this way can be helpful. So like looking at kind of, was there an uncle that he was just the weird uncle. He was the crazy uncle, and where'd that come from? Seeing that some of it may have came from, experiences as a childhood. Like I had an uncle that when my parents, they're gone now, but they were in their 70s, their late 70s when they passed away. And so my father grew up on a farm. And so one of his brothers got kicked in the head by a cow. And so he was the crazy uncle. So we talked about how, so not necessarily with him, but helping like my clients understand, like, so how was he treated by other family members? Like, what was the message you got from about mental health from them? And if my uncle was around now, like, what might be some ways that we might treat him differently, resources that we want him to have? Like, how might we be able to kind of change his history? And so, like, I use this kind of as a way to help them to normalize getting help, and also to explore their own generational traumas, and helping them to figure out how they may be able to do something different with their children and their nieces and nephews. Any questions so far? Is there anything that you might do with your clients, or if you're instructors or educators, is there something that you do with your students to help them to better understand how this all works?
I don't know if y'all can hear me. My voice is like going in and out.
We can hear you.
But I like the genogram. I'm in like South Louisiana, so it's like really rural here. And I have like, I think I've had one black male client, and he actually was Nigerian. And so using this genogram to like go through this with his family, I think would be really good. And even taking this PowerPoint to my professional staff, because I'm tempted, like you said, I always try to be like the one who's like speaking about race, because I am at a predominantly white institution. And so for me, I came from HBCUs, and I realized that they lacked a lot of cultural competency. So I'm always like, outside of our multicultural course, I'm like, when I first came, they couldn't pronounce my entire name. So my first name is Kiesha, and they just dismissed it. And I, like my first day of practicum, I let them know, like, if I'm feeling like this and I'm interning here, I can imagine that the students don't come because y'all don't even grant them the grace of knowing how to say their name. And so since I've been there, I've had like reoccurring clients of all ethnic backgrounds. But for me, being a young Black woman, one of the most proudest feelings I have is having students who look like me coming in and like destigmatizing this myth for them, being an advocate for them, an ally, being a resource. So I'm really enjoying the presentation. And I wanted to ask you about the Omega Psi Phi, like what their support group was, so I can get like additional information. I don't know if he was gonna like post the resources later, but I'm definitely enjoying it. So that was my input.
Yeah. So their mental health campaign is called Brother, You're on My Mind. And if you were to search that, they have like toolkits that they send to chapters, and they'll go in. If the chapter has been trained or have the resources, they can come in and talk at schools or events about like mental health in Black men. And so some of the fact sheets that they have, I actually just leave in the office, so that, as my African-American males and other men that don't see me but see other people in the counseling center are able to kind of just pick them up and read about depression in Black men or anxiety in Black men. Like, I don't necessarily do a lot to kind of push it on them, but I make sure that they can see it, that they're open, they're on the open, they're available to them. And sometimes I'll even share some of those resources with white men, not because I think that some of it is specific to the culture, but I think all men have some challenges with counseling and the role of counselors. And so some of it will address some of that. So if you do a search for Brother, You're on My Mind, you'll be able to find a ton of information, their fact sheets and their toolkits.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Another organization that I use a lot of their resources is BEAM, and it's Black Emotional and Mental Health, and it's BEAM again. And they have resources specific to Black masculinity. And so I use some of these, especially with my younger adult clients, my late teens, early adulthood clients, because like I walk them through them, and then I'll also I have some of these printed out, and so that they can like do them themselves and bring them back in so we can talk. So they have really good affirmation journal prompts, and so this is just an example of one of them that they have. They have several that I'll use with them today, and we'll work through it together. We'll talk about the prompts, and then I'll have them do them on their own and bring them in, and we can kind of process a little bit about what's going on in their life. Writing for resistance, another guided prompt that's specific to healing. So like ways that they're looking to heal from whatever it is they're experiencing, whether it has to do with like racial trauma, or if it has to do with, masculinity, or, being a dad and some of the mistakes they've made and they're trying to overcome. Like, we'll just sit down and we'll go through these. And so again, they have other resources on the site that I'll use and suggest to my clients. And then Beam also has these grounding practices that are specific to Black men. And so usually if sometimes I get resistance with, helping them to do grounding. But when I say to them, like, these resources are designed for you, they were designed with you in mind, they'll usually try it. I usually can talk clients into trying a little bit harder and using them and seeing if they work for them, and then processing if they don't, like what went wrong. And so these again are designed for men, and just understanding, how they can be more grounded, how they can address or deal with some of the emotions that they're experiencing. And I think, okay. And then this one I like, and I use a lot. I use these with my Black men, but particularly my young Black men, in reimagining what masculinity is. Like not having to feel like they have to stick within the norms of the community, of the nation, but just kind of defining it for themselves. And so this is something that tends to work. It brings up a lot of conversation. It helps us to kind of figure out, especially when I have some young men that have taken different approaches to their lives, or their identity is different than many within the community. This is very helpful because it helps them to feel seen and heard. Okay, and then I have a list of some of the websites that I really like. So Black Men Heal, what I like about that is that as counselors and therapists, again, this is one of those sites where they're looking to build mental health providers across the nation. And so you can fill out the information, you can be listed on their website, and then those that visit the website, they'll know that you are Black affirming, that you have an interest, a desire to help and serve African American men, and it helps them to connect you directly. Black Mental Wellness, that's a really good website, not just for African American men, but working with African American women. And we talked about Brother, You're on My Mind. And the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation, they offer 5 free sessions. Right now, there's a waiting list. And they've really, the idea is that they're going to continue to build on being able to provide these sessions. But they were specifically designed during the COVID crisis to be able to offer mental health sessions for people within the Black community that didn't have access. So if you're in a position where you can donate to some of these organizations, I want to encourage you to do that as well. Okay. All right, Dallas, I see that we have a few more things in the chat. Can you help me with that?
Dr. Robinson put a link to Brother, You're on My Mind Toolkit.
Oh, wonderful.
There are some questions on where to access the resources. If you could put links in the chat, or if they're available online. It seems like everyone really enjoys these resources and they seem really helpful.
Okay. Yeah, I promise you all that I will submit the PowerPoint and the links to the resources. Some of them you can just find at NAMI. If you go to NAMI and you click on mental health for, I think it's like culture and identity. And then there's a link for Black/African Americans. And then there's a link to a lot of these resources there as well. So you'd be able, even more than what I presented today, that talk about and share kind of, things that we can do to help within the community and resources for potential clients. Okay, but I'll make sure you get it all. All right. There's something I was going to share, but we're so close to time. There is another thing that I use a lot with my African American men is storytelling. And so the National Association for Black Storytellers, they have really good resources for videos and poems and things that you can use to help with storytelling. And so there's one There is the Ballad of Henry Moore. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's a Langston Hughes poem. And I can't remember the performer, but she put it to kind of a music and song, and she recited the poem. And for those of you that don't know, because you're just way too young, Henry Moore was an activist, and he and his wife were assassinated in the early 50s. He was a civil rights activist. He was executive or president of the NAACP, sorry. And so there was a poem when he died, when his wife and him died, Langston Hughes created a poem. Thank you, Dallas, for being. And then, and so this poem is really about like how their lives were stolen, but it didn't stop the battle. And so I use that sometimes with some of my men to talk about how much of who they are may have been stolen, but it doesn't mean that the battle's over. And it's really helpful and powerful. And we talk about what that means to them and what are their battles and how they continue them. And so storytelling is another thing that I tend to use with my clients as well. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me today. I truly appreciate each of you, again, sharing your mornings with me. I know there's other things you could be doing, and I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. All right. Okay, Dallas, I don't know, do you have like a minute to put up the polling questions? Do you have them? All right, so with polling questions, part of our CE requirement is that we have polling questions for you all. However, it's optional if you participate. And so Dallas is just going to put them in the chat. If you feel like you've gained some information or certain things were addressed, feel free to answer yes, no, whatever you need. And if you're not interested, that's completely fine. Again, it's optional for you, but it's a requirement for us. All right, thank you. You all have a wonderful day.
Denita, can you drop your email?
I sure can. I'll put it in the. There you go. Okay, and feel free to contact me. If you search my name in the Chicago School, you'll be able to find it as well. It's also my first and last name at the chicagoschool.edu. And so if you have questions or there's some way that I can help you or you need additional resources, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you,
All right,
Dr.
have a good day. Dallas, thank you so much for your help today. I really appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Okay.